So I got the Xbox 360 almost as soon as it came out, and I got the Wii soon after. I was in middle school at the time, and I played video games basically every single day. I was an officer in my middle school's Halo club when I was in the 6th grade, and a couple of years later I saved up my money, which was a very large portion of my money at the time, to buy the special edition of Halo Reach that came with some extra small things like Dr. Halsey's notebook and a patch that I got put into a Turvis tumbler that I still use to this day. Obviously, I'm still a Halo fan. I record all of my videos on my Houch, or Halo couch. But after a while, I ran out of games, and I took my Xbox 360 with me to college, but I wasn't enough of a gamer to really justify buying another game console. And over time, I played the same games over and over again, but my habit of gaming sort of faded while I was in college. And then something interesting happened. I developed this intrusive thought. It would pop up in certain moments where my head was empty. The thought was, I would be happy if only I had a Nintendo Switch. I thought about it all the time. I knew it wasn't logical, but it played over and over again in my mind. So when I got my very first engineering internship, I spent a lot of time driving so that I could get back and forth from my dormitory to my job, and I thought about spending the money on buying myself a Nintendo Switch, but I realized I really needed the money to, pay rent. So I sucked it up and I asked my parents if they would buy me a Nintendo Switch for Christmas. This was 4 or 5 years ago, and they did. And I'm sure you're anticipating the part of the story where I say that no, a Nintendo Switch did not make me happy. But that's not true. A Nintendo Switch did make me happy. I've had that Switch for at least 4 years now, and I can tell you that it has done wonders for my psyche. It turned out that what I was really missing was video games. Yes, the Nintendo Switch specifically was not 100% what actually made me happy, but I love video games, and it had been a really, really long time since I had gotten to play a new one. So this year, for my birthday, I bought myself a PS4 because I had finally exhausted every single game that I ever thought I would want to play on the Nintendo Switch, except for The Witcher 3, which I was planning on playing on an upcoming flight. But I don't play my PS4 as much as I play my Switch, because with my Switch, I can play like this. Or I can play like this. Oh, shut the fuck up. But you can't play either of those ways with a PlayStation or really any other console without heavy modification. So whenever a port comes out for the Nintendo Switch for a game that I think I might be interested in, I always prefer to play on the Switch. My PS4 has seen embarrassingly little action since I bought it 8-something months ago. About a month ago, Disco Elysium was on sale in the Switch store, and I went ahead and grabbed it since many, 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 many of my friends have said it's one of the greatest games of all time. And I just finished it about 2 days ago, and it was amazing. Definitely one of the best games I've ever played. Certainly the best one I played in 2022, although it did creep into 2023. But I have to say, please do not buy this game on the Nintendo Switch. I have never seen any game as buggy, borderline unplayable as the Nintendo Switch port of Disco Elysium. It's a fantastic game, and you should definitely play it. If you have any interest at all in the description I'm about to give of this game, you should do yourself a favor and buy Disco Elysium. But if you have an option to play it on literally any other platform, you should take that option. So what is Disco Elysium? I'm going to start with a couple of spoiler-free points about the game, then I'll go into character creation, and then I'm going to proceed through the plot in order. I definitely recommend skipping out after the spoiler-free section or character creation at the latest if you haven't played the game, and then come back and finish this video when you're done. However, this is not going to be an exhaustive review. This game took me 50 hours to complete, approximately 3 weeks where I pretty much didn't do anything other than play this game in my free moments. I woke up early to play this game before work or before my other tasks, and I fell asleep playing this game many, many times. I made it through one run where I completed just about everything that could possibly be completed, at least that I was interested in doing, and it took up a lot of time. I could absolutely go back and play this game over and over again, but I'm just not interested because the world felt so real to me. So this will be a review based on the 1.5 runs that I did, and not based on the game as a whole. I want to talk about the Switch port and its problems, I want to talk about my own experience, but mostly this is just me gushing about a game that I really, really liked. If you're looking for something a little bit more academic related to this game, there are many in-depth video reviews and analyses on YouTube, as well as the popular book The Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx. So as far as what Disco Elysium actually is, it's a detective mystery game that sort of plays like a cross between a text adventure and a tabletop game. Character creation is very easy, especially relative to something like Fallout or Skyrim. You only have 4 values to select, that being related to your intellect, your psyche, your physical prowess, and your dexterity. And then you are allowed to select 1 additional, more specific skill from the related skills to each of those. So character creation pretty much can't possibly take you more than 5 minutes unless you're extremely indecisive. Although the very first issue that I had with the controls for Disco Elysium on the Switch did show up in character creation. It's only possible, at least on my machine, to customize your character if you completely revert all the stats to 1 before putting points back in. This I found to be somewhat irritating. But eventually I did figure it out. Each of the 4 central ability scores has 6 corresponding skills, totaling to 24 different skills that have different values depending on how you build your character both at the beginning and throughout the game. The game's central gimmick, if you can call it that, is that as you go through the game, your different skills speak to you or have blocks of text appear in front of you giving you information when you're in the middle of interactions with other players. So you can be talking to someone and your empathy will tell you something about what they are feeling right now, things like that. However, each of these skills has a slightly, or in some cases, extremely different personality, and the personality of your character is based on the values that you assigned to each of the 24 core skills. The more points a skill has, the louder it speaks, or rather more often, the more you can rely on it. There are also checks, like in tabletop, that happen throughout the game. You roll dice to see whether your modifier combined with your dice roll achieved success in some part of the narrative. The ease of interface is definitely what I would call one of Disco Elysium's selling points. I think I could recommend this game to almost anyone who I think would be interested in the subject matter, and they'd be able to figure it out. It is a combat-free RPG, so in the extremely rare cases where combat occurs, it is usually decided by a single dice roll, or even a pre-scripted story event. This manages player frustration really, really well. I've DM'd 4 tabletop campaigns at this point, and every time I'm designing a campaign, I always have a difficult time keeping combat interesting and quick. Anybody who's ever played tabletop knows that combat can get long and it can get boring, especially if you are not the DM. So Disco Elysium's decision to keep combat to a minimum keeps the game moving and keeps it interesting. So in the actual gameplay, how this manifests is that for most of the game, you see your character in the world on the left side of the screen, and on the right side of the screen, you see a script, very much like a screenplay. Your character's dialogue options, as well as the dialogue that other characters say, and the dialogue coming from the voices in your mind. Now's as good a time as any to mention that the recently released Final Cut is fully voice acted, and if you have the opportunity to get your hands on the Final Cut over any other version, I would highly, highly recommend it. The fully voiced Final Cut is effectively an audiobook with a full cast. The voice acting in the final cut is genuinely, actually the best voice acting I have ever heard from a full cast. I've heard excellent voice acting before in movies and anime and all that stuff, but usually I hear one or two members of the cast who really stand out and everyone else doesn't seem to stand in their way. While there are a few standout characters in Disco Elysium as far as voice acting goes, even the worst of the cast is still head and shoulders above what you hear from most anime or dubbed television at the very minimum, but easily on par with a feature film. The game was $20 when I bought it on Switch, and apparently it was on sale at the same time for $10 on Steam. So it shouldn't be too difficult to get your hands on a copy of the full version. You may also be wondering why I'm covering this game. The channel is called Octopus Literary. I'm supposed to be covering literature. At one point I took 18 weeks to cover an 800,000 word book. As Disco Elysium comes out to over 1 million words in its script, it is 25% longer than Pact. Disco Elysium is more of a novel than most novels, and by that I mean it is about 10 of them. Additionally, on the why am I covering this end, this is just one of the kinds of stories that I like. I've mentioned many times on this channel that I prefer stories that explore a character but also explore the relationship between two characters, particularly if that relationship is not romantic or not about a parent and their estranged child. For some reason, it never occurred to me to try to cover a buddy cop story, but I suspect that this is because while I've seen many buddy cop movies, most movies are shorter than the kind of thing that I like to examine on this channel. As Disco Elysium is, as I previously stated, very, very long, there was plenty of material for me to look at and analyze, especially for only one video. Disco Elysium also masterfully skates the line of being a character study and giving the player freedom to create the personality of the protagonist. As the protagonist has amnesia, the player needs to piece together things about him and his life as they go along, but you also have the opportunity to choose what skills he might use to solve aspects of the case. There are some solidly defined aspects to his character, mostly to do with his backstory, but his personality traits and the way he solves problems are up to you to decide. And the game takes your choices and creates more choices for you based on the decisions you've made previously throughout the game. And on that note, the game is watching you. It's basically impossible to get through this game without having to do some amount of introspection. That is, of course, as long as you enjoy it and are into the game. Because the game is going to be examining you and the choices you make and trying to eke out details about you based on what you do. It seeks to identify things about you based on your playstyle, and then it definitely has something negative to say about it. Whether you're too proud, too modest, too extreme, or too much of a fence-sitter, the game will take you aside at least once and tell you exactly why that makes you suck. But it does it in a way that almost always feels fair, and the criticisms that are pre-scripted by the developers seem intelligent enough that you can always at least listen and try to learn something from what it has to say about you. So overall, my verdict is play the game, get the final cut. Don't get it on Switch, and if you're looking to play a nice or a sober person, do not go for the physical build. Any score over a 4 incorporates that skill into your personality. After playing the game for the first time as a much more logical person, I went back and tried the beginning of the game again from the perspective of someone who likes to punch things, and the inner monologue for that character is much more aggressive and much more interested in drugs. So without spoiling anything, if you are looking to play a nicer person or someone who doesn't consume drugs or alcohol, I would highly recommend against choosing the physique build. However, it is still possible to complete the game that way. It's just more difficult. So next I want to talk about my character creation. This part is still going to be pretty spoiler-free, but after this, if you don't want to be spoiled, you should get out. So here's the part where I have to admit that I generally don't play RPGs. I don't like playing a character based on myself, or a character that I create myself, because I have to feel like I'm helping someone or following a story that has been written for me, rather than just kind of going around and creating my own adventure. There are some games that are considered RPGs that still fit this definition. For example, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Obviously a game everyone enjoys, but I enjoyed that more than, say, Skyrim, because I felt like I was helping Link do the thing that he needed to do, rather than creating a character that I could project myself on. I'm not sure why I enjoy games this way, it's just the way that I am. So the game tells you you'll be playing as a detective, which when I opened up the game, the only thing that I knew was that it contained a character named Kim Kitsuragi, and I didn't know that I was even going to be solving a mystery. The game presents you with 4 options. You can play as a thinker, a feeler, a more physical type, or you can make your own stats. I decided to go ahead and make my own stats. Now, regardless of what I just said about not wanting to play as myself, I, as previously stated, have been a DM for several years, and something that I've found to be a truthism about RPGs, in tabletop in particular, is that a player needs to be able to use the skills that they want to use when they are playing the game. A talkative person playing someone who can't talk is probably going to quit. Somebody who wants to use big flashy spells in combat, being relegated to the role of a magicless barbarian, is going to have a miserable time. But in general, when someone's playing a game for the first time, you want them, even if they are going to be role-playing a different character, you want them to be able to use the skills that they have in real life or would want to use in the game. Since I've never really played a mystery game before, and I'm not super fond of RPGs, I figured it would be a good idea for me to try to recreate my own stats for the protagonist. In particular, I was afraid of a scenario where, for example, I played a physical type, so I was supposed to be stupid, but I, Jade, had figured out the answer to the mystery, and then there was nothing I could do about it because my character didn't have information that I had gleaned. One time in the game proper, for example, there was a particular check that I failed over and over again and ended up forgetting to go back and solve. However, based on some metagaming clues, things that came up in the modifiers, I was able to figure out the answer to what it was trying to get the protagonist to solve. But then I never actually solved it. This made certain parts of the story frustrating for me because I knew the answer, but I couldn't select it because the option wasn't there. I wanted to avoid this as much as possible, so I tried to recreate my own mental stats for the protagonist. I also, in general, am going to try to solve problems a certain way, and I figured it would be least frustrating for me if those options were available to me. So I thought about my own skills, and I initially started with a build of 4, 5, 1, 2 with a specialty in volition. So that's 4 intelligence, 5 psyche, 1 strength, 2 motorics or dexterity, and volition, the stubbornness modifier, being the highest. However, I died immediately upon entering the world. So I reloaded and I changed my stats slightly to 5, 4, 1, 2. No particular reason here, I just figured it would probably be better for the game. 5, 4, 1, 2, so slightly increased intelligence, slightly lowered psyche, still only 1 physical and 2 motorics. I also chose my signature skill as rhetoric, which I thought would be a little bit more fun for me. It's been about a month since I started playing the game, so I've had time to think about the fact that these stats do not actually match up to what I'm like in real life, but close enough. I started up the game again, and just for your information, I did die again. And a few people that I knew told me that the problem was that I only had 1 strength. They said that it was really not advisable, probably impossible, to complete the game with only 1 strength. So I didn't change it. I reloaded it as many times as necessary in order to properly get the game started with only 1 strength, which corresponds to only 1 health. And I kept 1 health for the duration of the game. So this is the end of the section on character creation. If you haven't played this game, you should definitely leave. Go play the game and come back. So the game proper starts with you floating in a void, being spoken to by various aching parts of your body. It turns out that you attempted suicide the night previous, and you are basically trying to decide whether to wake up. I actually did try to not wake up, but it didn't work. I'm not sure if there's a path you can you can make out of it where you don't wake up. But you are woken up by the sound of an engine approaching outside of your hotel room. You wake up and you find yourself on the floor, your necktie hanging from the ceiling fan. And this is where I encountered the first real problem of the game. On the Nintendo Switch version, whoever decided what the controls should be should really never be allowed to decide the controls for anything ever again. After going through the instructions on how to use the controls in the main menu didn't help me, it took a fair bit of Googling for me to figure out that the controls were actually not what the main menu says they are. If you want to be able to interact with any items, you need to hold down the left bumper, not the left trigger, which I don't see why you would need to hold that down either. You need to hold down the left bumper to highlight the objects that are available for you to interact with, and then use the right, while holding down the left bumper, use the right thumbstick to toggle through the different interactable objects, and then hit A when you've highlighted the one that you want to. This is extremely frustrating. Throughout the entire game, I had a very hard time selecting the thing that I wanted to select. I selected my partner over and over and over and over and over again when I really wanted to click something else. I also frequently ran into an issue where I couldn't turn corners. In particular, there's a staircase next to a character named Call Me Manana that is borderline impossible to actually traverse if you're using the controls the way they are intended. What I had to do every single time up until like the last day, if I wanted to traverse that staircase, was zoom out, highlight a nearby door, and tell my character to navigate to it so that the auto navigator would go down the stairs for me, and then I could break out of the auto navigation loop. It's a miracle I made it through this game. I've never played a game with such horrible controls before. Controls are my berserk button. I have rage quit many video games for having bad controls. Fortunately, Disco Elysium relies less on its controls than most other games, especially because it has, like I said, low to no combat. However, there were times where I even got stuck in some corner and had to reload the game. Anyway, moving on, I explored the hotel room, picked up my pants, turned on the light, and because I had absolutely no pain threshold, the light searing into the back of my eyes killed me, and then killed me again, and then killed me again. However, like I said, I had picked the build that I wanted to stick with for the rest of the game, and I decided not to give up. I kept going and just decided not to turn on the light and to navigate around in the dark. I put my clothes on and left to go find my other shoe. The first character that you encounter is a woman a few doors down from you in the hostel where you're staying. And this is the part where I have to say, I think I actually had a little bit of an advantage in this game because I'm a woman. The protagonist is constantly tempted by certain machismo or toxically masculine, I'm not sure what the adverb form of that is, but options where he thinks that a woman would like something that she wouldn't. And I never or almost never had him try any of these things, and I believe this kept me alive a little bit longer because, like I said, I only had one health. But it also meant that some of the more poignant moments of the game, especially concerning his ex-wife who deserted him, were lost on me a little bit. I could see the problems in the protagonist's behavior towards women where he couldn't, and this made my second run, the one where I only had physical skills and no mental or emotional skills, very, very frustrating. The protagonist in a physical build constantly wants to have sex with women to the point where sometimes you can get into conversation corners where your only options are to insult a woman or ask to fuck her. And eventually this got old. And by eventually, I mean before the end of the first day it got old. I never ended up finishing that run because the only thing I really wanted to do with that run was beat up Measurehead. After talking to the woman at the beginning of the game, I went downstairs, spoke to the cafeteria manager who told me that I had trashed my hotel room and the cafeteria and the bar and half the decorations in the bar, and that I owed him 130 currency, but that my partner was waiting for me on the other side of the cafeteria. walked over and I met Kim Kitsuragi. The only thing I knew about this game going in was that it contained a character named Kim Kitsuragi, and that for whatever reason it was important to players that he was pleased with their cop something. I pretty much came to the conclusion that he was probably like the chief of police. You had to report to him, or you submit reports to him, and his approval gave you some monetary value, like you know, money or the ability to traverse through the game. No, actually, Kim Kitsuragi is your partner, your sidekick throughout the game. He's present approximately, I don't know, depending on how you play, he's present about 90% of the time, standing beside you, chipping in during conversation, and that's when I realized what had happened. I was born into the internet, you know, molded by it. So I realized that Kim Kitsuragi had probably been distilled into a meme the same way most pop culture gets distilled. Out of a cast of 25 people, there's this huge stratification where 1 or 2 of them seem to be remembered, and the rest of them really don't seem to exist. While I was sure that Kim was going to end up being a good character and a nice guy, I went in with the expectation that I had been seriously overhyped for this character, and that he was probably not the immediately intensely lovable angel the internet had told me he was. In other words, I was under the impression that the entire rest of the internet had decided they were going to be Kim Kitsuragi's bitch, and I decided I was not going to be that person. So I approached Kim, I started talking to him, and depending on your build, you'll get a couple of different pieces of information about this guy. There are a variety of different things that are said, but I picked out this one that I wanted to highlight. If an assault were launched on this building right now, if the windows came crashing down and the whole world descended upon you, this man would hurl himself in death's way to save you. You are sure of this, but why? You find out pretty quickly that Kim has never met you before. He's a detective from another agency. There is a bit of a territorial dispute about the area that this murder took place in, and so each department or each district sent one detective to work on the case. You were sent a few days ago, but you went on a bender where you did so much drugs and drank so much and then hung yourself that you lost your memory. And Kim is the other guy. You find out pretty quickly that he admires your division for taking on more work than his does, and it becomes apparent pretty quickly that his car is what wakes you up at the beginning of the game. After that, I spoke with Lena, and I totally misinterpreted some of the signals given to me by the game. Lena is an old woman in a wheelchair. However, if you have a high enough Esprit decor score, the game will tell you that you feel in your heart that she should be a police officer and a member of your team. This is apparently a hangover, or a leftover from the fact that Lena was originally supposed to be a partner for you, but it was too difficult to fit her into the story as a partner and into the game as a partner, so they ended up dropping that part of the game. I made it a personal goal. Actually, I had 2 goals going into this game. 1, I was going to turn this man's life around, and 2, I was going to get Lena on my team. For this reason, I exhausted the entire plot line with Lena, and then somebody told me later that it was not possible to make her a police officer. Then we went and inspected the corpse. I threw up so many times that I had to go do something else and, quote, get my shit together. I found my jacket, which was hanging off the roof of the hostel, and I needed to make a pretty small jump to get down there. I tried to jump, but chickened out, got embarrassed about the fact that I chickened out, and then died of embarrassment. After that, I went and explored the map a little bit. I spoke with Annette, a 12-ish-year-old girl who has met me before, but I hadn't remembered her, and she gave me a hat that I wore as much as I could for the rest of the game. I went and spoke with Joyce. I tried to not ask anyone for money, although at the end of the day, I did end up asking Joyce for money, Joyce is a rich woman whom you can speak with. It was actually so difficult for me to ask for money from Joyce that I had to mute my television and also close my eyes when I pressed the button to ask Joyce for money. My volition was lower than the protagonist's at this point because I couldn't stomach even the idea of asking for money. But she eventually gave me the $130 that I needed to stay in the Whirling in Rags for one more night. And after that, I asked Silang, I don't know how his name is pronounced, for $10 at one point, and I didn't ask anyone else for money. The rest of the game I got by on tear or selling items. I didn't even ask for money from the hyper-rich light-bending guy. So that was basically the end of day one. I wasn't able to get the body down. I wasn't able to make a huge amount of progress in the mystery, but I was able to speak with basically every single NPC and exhaust all dialogue that didn't require a check. I also analyzed the footprints, did a bunch of visual calculus rolls, and got quite a bit of information from that. So it was an okay day. I'm a huge Pikmin player, and when Pikmin 3 came out, well, for the Switch anyway, the Pikmin 3 Deluxe, I played the same days like 8-9 times so that I could get the most optimally efficient day. I didn't worry about that too much in this game. I decided that I didn't know what mechanics were present. I didn't know what things were going to affect other things. So I tried to just play the game as realistically as possible, like as if I was a regular person. This, I think, was the right decision. On my second playthrough, when I was playing as the physical type, I beat up Measurehead before I ever spoke to Joyce. And then when I spoke to Joyce, she said that there was no way into the harbor. I had hoped that beating up Measurehead would unlock something that would allow me to get Joyce into the harbor, but it never happened. It just wasn't part of the game. So I figured the best way to do this was to try to use my own judgment as much as possible. Although a few times I did Google something when I got frustrated, I tried to keep it to a bare minimum. And the things that I was Googling were as inconsequential as I could manage. So as far as day two, I guess I should elaborate on how exactly I intended to turn this man's life around. What does that mean? So I had a set of rules for him. No alcohol, no drugs, no women, no racism, no corruption, no saying stuff that doesn't seem situationally appropriate. However, this did end up tanking my scores in a lot of other things. It locked me out of all of the political quests that I tried to I tried to remain professional, and the game kind of hounded me for that. So if you want to be able to do the political quests, you know, have a little bit less regard for remaining professional, I guess. I also initially started with no negative self-talk. Every time Harry had the opportunity to say something negative about himself, I would make him say something like, "I'm a superstar," or "Disco baby." Okay, he never says disco baby. You get my point. But as it became clear that more and more of mine and Kim's situation was my fault, and that I had genuinely hurt some of the people around me, I started to apologize more. This started with Sylvie, a woman who used to work at the Whirling in Rags, whom I treated so poorly that she quit her job. I apologized to her, and then after that, the apologies, let's just say, when the apologies start coming, they don't stop coming. By the middle of the second day, I was accused of being a sorry cop by the game. I told it was wrong and to fuck off. At the end of the game, however, sorry cop was still the highest score that I had. Like I said, I did try to stay as blind as possible about the plot, but there were a few things that I ended up having to Google anyway, or wanting to Google, like, especially to do with the controls and the controls problems that I was having. So there were some things that I ended up finding out ahead of time that I really didn't want to know, or spoilers coming up in unexpected places, or me accidentally clicking things I didn't mean to. For a game like this, I'd highly recommend having a spotter. A spotter being someone who will answer questions for you in an intelligent way rather than, you know, asking Google. In this case, I had a Discord server full of friends who would answer my questions. Like if I said, am I going to be locked out if I do this? That was way safer than going and asking Google, where I did at one point ask, am I going to be locked out of this? And I found out that somebody who I thought was the murderer wasn't. A bit of a bummer. So if you can have somebody who has already played the game answer these questions for you, I'd highly recommend it. This is definitely a game that is benefited by going in as completely blind as you can muster. Now's a good time to mention, if you are still watching this and you haven't played the game, you should go play the game. But part of this game did give me trouble. See, my favorite game when I was in high school, which I recognize now this game is considered problematic and all that stuff, that's not the point. My favorite game when I was in high school was Catherine, a game... Okay, that's not entirely true. My favorite game when I was in high school was Tetris. I played Tetris for like 4 to 6 hours a day during class. And I became very, very good at Tetris, but eventually that got a little bit old. I came across Catherine, which is like Tetris on crack with a story, and I bought it. I really enjoyed the game, but only the Tetris bits. So I would skip NPC dialogue. I would just avoid NPCs or skip through whatever stupid things they had to say. And it turned out when I got to the end of the game that the point of the game was to try to prevent the people around you from committing suicide. By the time I got to the end of the game, every single person in the bar was dead, and I cried because I had killed them. I had been supposed to save them and I hadn't. So because of this, I am now a compulsive click every dialogue option person, and that was not good for this game either. I quickly learned that I needed to be selective about which options I picked and which options I didn't. Initially, I only didn't click something if it violated one of those rules, but it became clear that sometimes you could just say stupid things and that would make you die. Which happened a lot. But in my defense, there were walls and walls and walls of text. The one real downside, I mean, I don't know if you can call it a real downside, but something that could be considered a downside about the brainier style of play is a skill called Encyclopedia. Encyclopedia loves to give you almost entirely pointless facts about things going on around you. Like a full paragraph of pointless facts every time somebody says a sentence. I read it. I did. I read everything. I skimmed as little as I could possibly handle, but as I said previously, I played a lot of this game either immediately after waking up or right on the verge of sleep. I fell asleep playing this game at least 3 times. And then once I fell asleep, I'd wake up 4 hours later and get right back to playing. So I had a shaky understanding of some aspects of the world, some aspects of politics, and some aspects of the game. So the thing about this game is that it tries to get you over and over again to participate in politics, and then to think about the politics that you just participated in. And I do actually have political opinions, but I didn't really express them enough for the game for a variety of reasons. For one, because I only had 1 health, I felt like if I, for example, said the wrong thing to Titus Hardy and he punched me, I would just die. I also think it's important to try to keep your motives and therefore your opinions in your back pocket when you're in a position that people think of as antagonistic to you. Everywhere in Revachol are signs that say "fuck the police" and all that kind of thing. And to me, the idea of walking around advertising my political beliefs was making my character vulnerable, was allowing people to get to know my character in a way that made him too human for my comfort. I didn't want people to see him as something that could be threatening or dangerous or idiotic. I wanted him to be seen as whatever I wanted him to be seen as to each person. And I didn't generally see him talking politics as being beneficial. I'm also just in general a professional. In my current line of work, I am highly discouraged from participating in politics in public, which is why I almost never talk politics on this channel. And in general, my opinion is that I only say something political if I have thoroughly thought through it and I can defend it. I don't give away my opinion willy-nilly. I only want to say something if I really, really mean it. And early on, I messed up a few times regarding the politics in Disco Elysium because I misunderstood or misjudged the political situation, and I leapt at certain opportunities or statements that I didn't fully understand. For example, at one point I said that Martinez needs to be able to govern itself, or sorry, Revachol should be able to govern itself, which is something I do genuinely believe, but in the context of the particular conversation that we were having, it ended up giving me a little bit of a fascist score. The only thing I said was that I didn't think that they should be occupied by an externally governing force, but the 4 possible political alignments in Disco Elysium are communist, which is basically vanilla communism, but also just kind of leftist politics in general. Well, U.S. leftist politics in general mostly falls into communism in this game, because all of the positions that you can take, or almost all of them, are fairly extreme. Like, every sentence that is political that you can say is almost always like the most extreme form of whatever politics you're thinking of. There's fascism, which is mostly racism, or monarchy, or a supportive monarchy, which we'll get to that later. There's moralism, which is support of the existing government, the moral intern, but also support of the idea that everything needs to stay the same as it is right now. And finally, there was ultra-liberalism, which is like capitalism on crack. So the names of the political alignments in Disco Elysium do not totally 100% jive with what they actually describe. You know, fascists aren't necessarily racist, or they aren't necessarily in support of monarchy. Although any racist or monarchy-based answers you can give do end up counting towards fascism. Ultra-liberal, most people would not assume that ultra-liberal means someone who strongly believes in capitalism. I also just Googled ultra-liberalism, and I wasn't able to find a definition that jived with the Disco Elysium definition. So a lot of these words are kind of switched around. But in general, while you, the player, can agree with a mix of the options that are given to you, so if there are, say, I don't know, 100 political questions in the game, you don't have to choose one of the 4 every single time. You don't have to end up with 100 points in fascist or whatever. You do end up with a mix. However, almost all of the sentences, the prompts that are given to you are pretty extreme. Like one sentence might be, we should grind up all the workers, or we should grind up all of the union bosses, or we should grind up all of the governors into paste. And if you say, I don't think we should be grinding anybody into paste, then the game thinks you are a fence sitter. This I didn't really appreciate. I think if I was more active in politics in real life, I might have found this funnier. I do think you are supposed to some degree, find it funny. But in general, my relationship with politics is a little bit more complicated than maybe the game was expecting it to be, or than more than the game's intended audience is. I will go ahead and admit freely that the people who wrote this game have a much better understanding of politics than I do. I do have a few issues that I've researched to the extent of my ability, and I feel very strongly about. But I can't argue the precise differences in a lot of these definitions of factions and all that kind of stuff. But there's this one quote from Worm that actually stuck with me for the past several years since I read Worm, that is often forgotten about, or didn't mean nearly as much to other people as it meant to me. There's a character named Brian in a book called Worm that I was particularly fond of, both the book and the character, but he said something that at the time I didn't really jive with. It goes like this. People are suffering all around the world. We ignore what's happening elsewhere every second of every day, focusing only on our country, our city, our neighborhood, or on the people we see daily. We only really care about the pain and unhappiness of our loved ones, our friends, our families, because we couldn't stay sane if we tried to support and save everyone. Nobody could try to do anything like that, except maybe Scion, a character in Worm. I'm applying that concept to a similar scale. My family and my team, they take priority, and they take priority in that order. If I have to choose one way or the other, I'm going to take the option that includes my family and you guys. This is, I think it's actually the quote that is used for true neutral on TV tropes. It could have been changed by now, but the point is, when I first read this, I was very disappointed in this character. I felt that this quote, this idea that you only have enough energy to focus on the people around you, is nihilism. It indicated that he had given up, or that he was depressed, or that or that he was running from something, running from responsibility, running from the opportunity to make a difference. But since reading Worm for the first time, I've come to realize that certain things I understood about capitalism and other related topics I no longer agree with. And I have to sit down and basically completely reevaluate what I think about many different political topics. All the while, of course, major world events have been happening for the past several years. So I firmly believe that politics are a very, very bad hobby for someone who struggles with their mental health. There's almost always more awful you can find just by opening up your phone and heading to any news site. And whatever you find there will support your political views in one way or another. Almost everyone is willing to participate with you in discussing politics or learning more about it. It's an unhealthy coping mechanism that will only make you less happy over time. Obviously, I think like any vice, it's perfectly healthy in small doses, but for a person who is struggling with depression or nihilism, or a particular grade of nihilism, I think it's okay if you do it in academic or professional settings, but trying to get active within online communities related to politics, for example, is a recipe for depression and spiraling. I also think it's okay to get involved in local politics where you can actually see the result of your efforts, tying back to what I said about the quote from Brian from Worm. I think that trying to comprehend all of the world and save everyone can be overwhelming unless you truly dedicate your life to it, and even then you have to partition it out. But for a layperson, you really only should, in my opinion, do so much, especially if you're struggling. So for the protagonist, who was clearly struggling, I wanted to find him hobbies. I wanted to find him things that he could do with his time, because he spent quite a bit of time thinking about how he wanted to be doing drugs and drinking, and fucking, and all kinds of other things that I wasn't allowing him to do. So I had to find something else for him to do. But I knew that politics wasn't the answer. I mean, I kind of thought the game was going to punish me for this, but the game actually seems to support this as well. I didn't complete any of the political vision quests, but at the end of the game, if you do fully follow the path of one or more of the political ideologies, you will inevitably come to the conclusion that getting involved in politics will not save you. I also waited until way too late to start actually giving my opinion on anything, unless I was just talking to Lena or Kim or somebody else who was safe. So I was completely locked out of all of the political vision quests. But I had a lot of fun as an art critic cop, a superstar cop, and all those other things that you can do outside of politics in this game. Additionally, I did, after reaching maybe the second or third day, I did reach out to the person I normally talk politics with and talk him into buying this game. The last thing to note about the second day was that I decided to call in my badge. I had completely neglected to do this previously. I got into Kim's car, I picked up the radio, I called Station 41, I said I lost my badge, and everybody in the group started making fun of me and saying that I was the worst cop ever. Oh, I also asked for money. Oh wait, this was day one. This was on day one, because I really needed money. I told them that I needed money for the case. They laughed at me. They told me I was an asshole. They said they were never going to help me with anything again, something, you know, that kind of stuff. So I turned it off, and I did not call Station 41 for the rest of the game. They made fun of me, I didn't like that, and they never knew that my badge or gun went missing. However, later on in the game, there started to be these logical breakdowns where things that I hadn't caused to happen would happen. One such example being the doctor back at Station 41. So I have no idea who this doctor is. I never spoke to him. I never asked to speak to him. In fact, in the save file I was working from, I had never contacted Station 41 at all. So when I called Station 41 on day 5, trying to call in backup for the upcoming tribunal, which I figured maybe I could call in backup for, the only person I could talk to was the doctor, who said that he didn't want to talk to me again. He'd been ordered to not speak to me, and that he couldn't give me any more information. I had never spoken to him. I'd never spoken to anyone at Station 41 at that point. And, but the game had lost track of this fact. It had made this up at some point. There were numerous logical issues like this, and I have no idea what the cause is. So then we got to the 3rd day. I had spent most of day 2 trying to figure out who this lunatic was who had driven all over town, crashing into things, knocked over this giant sign that locked out the waterlock bridge, and had separated Lena from her husband, and ran over the pawn shop and all this stuff. I was really having some difficulty with the mystery. I wasn't getting very far because I didn't want to talk to Measurehead and adopt his racist ideology. Actually, I should go back a little bit. The one opinion I always expressed was being, I guess you could call, an anti-racist. The partner in the game, Kim Kitsuragi, is a minority, and many, many times throughout the game, someone will say something disparaging towards him. And every single time I made sure to stand up for Kim. I really didn't want him to think that I was a bad person, but I also, I felt like this was a totally safe and police officer appropriate reaction to have. I wanted Kim to believe that I had his back, even if I wasn't trying to be, even if I wasn't trying to bend over backwards to please him at every point. I didn't want him to think that I was some kind of asshole. I'm sure everyone can see where this is going. So, one possible option for getting back my gun was to talk to Measurehead, this racist who was guarding the gate that would allow me to talk to Everett Clare. You have a couple of options for how to get to Claire, one of which is to talk to Measurehead and adopt his racist ideology so that he trusts you and then lets you in. You do have to become, like, actually racist, though. You can't pretend to be racist. You have to become a racist. You can forget this later, like, you can scrub this from your mind, but you will have still taken those actions. So I knew immediately I was not going to do this. One of my rules in the beginning of the game was no corruption. I was only going to do things honorably. I was going to be the best possible cop. So I was definitely not going to become a racist. One of your other options, of course, is to beat up Measurehead. My second playthrough with a physical body existing purely so that I could go beat up Measurehead. It was awesome. I got to punch him in the face and then do a 360 roundhouse kick and, like, kick him down and then press the button and say, I think I said, "Disco Inferno, baby," or something. It was great. But in my initial build, which was in which I had a 1 in strength, I did not have a prayer of knocking this 6'4" man or whatever. In fact, he was probably bigger than 6'4". 6'4" is huge next to me, not next to a real a guy like the protagonist. So I wasn't willing to become a racist, and I wasn't able to knock out Measurehead. So I was kind of waiting for the third option to become available, which was to jump to get my jacket, land down so that I could get into the harbor, and keep going. However, my savoir-faire, my yellow thing score was so low, because I only had a 2 in that I had to wait a long time to level up so that I could get my jacket. So the only thing I could really see myself doing was trying to find this crazy driver on the second day. So I asked everybody, I looked for clues. I did fail the visual calculus check, and I didn't have a way to level up without sacrificing a level up that could possibly go to savoir-faire. But finally, of course, on Wednesday morning, the water lock opened, and I was able to cross the river. And I, found out that the person who drove their car everywhere, crashing into things and knocking over the billboard, was me. In the process, I found my waterlogged police car, as well as my badge and my dress jacket. My badge saying, finally telling me my name, Harry Dubois. I don't know if I was supposed to see this coming, but I certainly didn't. I had no idea this was coming, and I was absolutely shocked when it finally happened. I even wondered during the whole cutscene where Harry and Kim are waiting on the swings for the ice to melt, for the tide to go out. I wondered why Kim was letting us do this. He was normally such a hard ass, if I wanted to get off topic, he would say, no, we have to solve the murder. But of course, Kim had figured it out before I had, that I was the culprit and that I needed to see my car under the water. This made me suspicious of Harry, myself, for the rest of the game. Every possible thing that I thought Harry could have done, I believed he did it, except for commit the murder. I knew for a fact that he had come into Martinez because of the murder that had already occurred. Everybody corroborated that, and I also didn't think that his gun was used for the murder for the same reason. But everything else that he could have done, I totally thought he did it. I also turned into the sorriest cop who ever existed. I apologized for everything. And then after that, I had to ask Kim every 5 minutes if he was okay with having me around because I sucked so bad. So I think at this point it's worth discussing what makes Kim such a great companion character. For one, the game needs a straight man. It's very, very difficult to play Harry as a serious person. The most serious you can possibly play him, he still comes across as being more than a little bit off. The normal things that he does seem odd to other people. He doesn't behave in a way that really maps to the way the rest of the people in the world behave. Kim is fairly stoic. He laughs at jokes if you get to know him well enough. And he does enjoy the occasional 15-ish seconds of fun, but that's about it. The game needs somebody like this to keep the gameplay feeling balanced and the world feeling realistic, rather than it feeling like a silly game, which is what it would feel like if it was just Harry. Having Kim around keeps the contrast in your mind. You know that this isn't a silly game. Harry is a silly person, or an aggressive person, or however you're playing him. But as a video game companion, he has a lot of traits that make him very likable from a mechanic standpoint. His following algorithm is very, very good. You can get stuck, or I got stuck repeatedly in the crowd full of people at the traffic jam, but you can always clip through Kim. I am pretty sure if you couldn't clip through Kim, the game would actually be unplayable. You'd probably spend a bunch of time like trying to untangle yourself from Kim after you got kind of fused together in a very disgusting horror film kind of way. He's very observant and quiet, and he always listens. He allows you to do the interviews, and he only speaks up if you need help, or if he has something entertaining or funny to say, or something that is reflective of what he thinks of you. I mentioned before that I was an officer in the Halo Club when I was in middle school, and actually when I was in the 7th grade, I worked very, very hard to create an as realistic as possible Cortana cosplay for Halloween. Obviously it was, to a 7th grader's ability. But I loved Cortana. And I recently went back and played Halo 1 again. And oh my gosh, she is so annoying. She says the same things over and over again, most of which are not helpful. She pretty much exists to continue to remind you that she exists for when she's important to the plot. I mean, there's many other reasons why Cortana exists, but that's what I felt like when I was playing the game. I was so frustrated with her, and I wanted her to be quiet. Which is awful. I mean, look at my couch. But Kim never feels imposing. He's a quiet man, and so it feels like a treat when he has something to say. you have the option of playing parts of the game without Kim, but I never found that I really wanted him to leave. There were a couple of things that it was wiser to achieve while Kim wasn't around, but since I wasn't drinking or doing drugs or doing anything corrupt, there wasn't a whole lot that I actually needed Kim not to be around for. I did think that he needed to not be around when I was reading a book, so I disappeared into my cabin at one point to read the alphabet book, just to see what would happen. And it turns out that the really funny bit about reading the alphabet book is the discussion that you have with Kim afterwards if he's there when you read it. Anyway, but I mentioned earlier that there are some standouts in the voice cast, and Kim Kitsuragi's voice actor, Julien Champenois, is extremely charismatic. He is probably the standout from the entire cast. Apparently, he was just a guy who had done a little bit of voice acting work for commercials that the developers knew, and they thought that he had a really wonderful voice, and they asked him to use his normal speaking voice for Kim. They gave him a beta version of the game and allowed him to get comfortable with the character, and then just asked him to act like himself. And I think this lends to what makes Kim feel like such a genuine and real person. When I was finished with the game, I had like a split-second moment where I went, wait, Kim isn't actually my friend? Kim is just a video game character. Which, despite what my persona as an internet fandom person might seem like, I've never had that thought before. I have never thought of characters as real people. Kim Kitsuragi actually came as close to breaking that barrier in my mind as any fictional character has ever. And I'm convinced that a significant portion of that was the voice acting. Props all around. But on a character level, it's really hard to be a bad person when a good person is standing right beside you. This game wants you to be thinking about yourself and your decisions and your moral character. And if Kim's not there, you can do whatever you want and feel like it's a video game. But Kim is a nice person. Kim is a good person. If you don't have enough money, he will sell his belongings so that you can continue to have a place to sleep. I've seen many comments across the internet in the last couple of days since I finished the game where people said that they tried to do an evil play of the game, where they treated Kim badly or otherwise let Kim down, and they found that they couldn't. I hate racists in real life, but I humiliated them in this game if they treated Kim poorly. But the thing is, Harry needs Kim. It's revealed on day 3 that Harry has basically alienated his actual partner, a guy named Gene, whom I didn't really like. But I didn't really like him because Gene was angry at Harry. Harry had treated him really poorly, and Gene just wasn't having it and didn't really handle him in the way that Kim does. Kim has the patience to deal with Harry's antics as long as Harry treats him well. But the 15th Indo tribe thought, which you can complete pretty early in the story, reveals that of all of the friends that Harry had when he was a child, they are all dead. He doesn't know exactly what happened to all of them, but he knows that he's the last to survive. This is a very difficult world that they live in, and Harry doesn't appear to have anyone he can really call a friend. Kim has a lot of parallel interests to Harry. They both have an appreciation for music and cars, and to a much lesser extent, pinball. They also both have experience with working with teenagers. Harry and Kim have the potential to be friends, and their particular interaction of their personalities seems like it works in almost any configuration, as long as you treat Kim like a nice person. So from a player perspective, Kim comes across as one of the most important aspects of the game. Every time you think about doing something really silly, you know that Kim is going to say something or think something differently about you, and he seems to react the way that a incredibly kind but still human person would. If you behave like a monster, he will not like you, and you still have to stand next to him while he doesn't like you. And that really sucks. So, back to the actual story. As I stated previously, I think hobbies are essential to mental stability if you have any amount of free thinking time. But, like I said, many of the hobbies that the game presented for Harry as options, like doing speed, drinking alcohol, getting involved in local politics, that kind of stuff, I had not approved for Harry. So on the second day, I started getting Harry into some hobbies that I felt were a little bit better for him. The first was cryptozoology. Lena, the old woman in the wheelchair, and her husband are very involved in cryptozoology. I had Harry talk to Lena and learn everything about all of the different cryptids. This was one of the few things that I did in secret from Kim. Kim didn't appear to be super interested in the cryptids and he thought it was a waste of time. So I snuck out after he went to sleep to ask more about them. And on the second day, I started to pursue the plotline where you can help some local teenagers establish a dance club in an abandoned church. Music is something that Harry seemed genuinely interested in and something that could continue to sustain him emotionally. And helping others is almost always a great way to improve your mental health. I thought that this plotline seemed like a really promising one for Harry and his future. The first thing I did was obviously talk to a seal, as you are supposed to do, and she took my Dick Mullen hat, which I wasn't really happy about, but I figured it was the right thing to do. I was pretty irritated that she never wore my hat. And then the one irritating logic flaw that I encountered in the game was that I figured out that there were drugs involved in the music club because of a hint that was given during the prompt for the logic tech to figure that out. But I never actually failed that check, or I never actually passed it. I forgot to pass the check, and then later the game forgot that I hadn't passed that check. And Harry expressed remorse that he was not able to prevent the kids from doing drugs, basically. Or actually, a seal expressed remorse that Harry wasn't able to prevent her friends from doing drugs. This was not only another logical breakdown, but also the one case of what I referenced before. I, Jade, knew that there was something Harry didn't know, but I couldn't get Harry to figure it out. Or rather, I did end up forgetting to. But then later, there was no way for me to make it up. And I knew this, but Harry didn't, and Harry couldn't act on it. Obviously, this is not a flaw in the game at all. It's just a rationale behind why I built my protagonist the way I did. By this point, I had actually talked to Everett Clare. Everett Clare was the union boss, and I really, really, really hated this guy. I am not 100% clear on what his politics were. Okay, I was. But I didn't really care. I just hated him as a person. I didn't help him at any turn. Actually, I was going to refuse his help finding my gun, but Kim thought something about how he was disappointed that I wasn't trying to get my gun back, and I didn't want to disappoint Kim, so I took the mission, but then I ended up changing my mind. I never actually opened the door. So the mission is that you need to go unlock the door to a weasel's apartment so that he feels afraid and he feels like the police could be coming after him. He's basically using you as a pawn to kind of foot in the door you into becoming more of a lackey for him and be able to show more that he has the police in his pocket. I ended up not actually completing this. I didn't even not complete it on purpose. I decided not to, but I kept putting it off and putting it off until the timer eventually did run out. Then later, when he asked me to get 2 signatures to construct a youth center, which was actually just an excuse for him to be able to buy more land, I had the really, really drunk guy sign it for me, and then he took my pen. I hate that guy. Funny story, I actually play all of my games on a $50 projector that I bought off of Amazon, and because the angle of the projector is super harsh, I can't actually read the bottom row of anything. So for the entire game, I had no idea how much money I had. I mean, I had an idea, I knew how many digits worth of money I had, but that was basically it. Go ahead and laugh. But I also didn't figure out until the chair had killed me a couple of times that you could heal yourself using the left and right buttons on the D-pad. I kept trying to access my inventory and find the medicine in there, but I could never find it. And I kept dying. But then finally, when I had died to the stupid chair in Everett Clare's office one too many times, I googled how to heal myself and I realized what a moron I was. Yeah. Then there was the cigarette guy. There's almost nothing notable about the cigarette guy, except for the fact that I had to talk to him 4 times. This is where I decided that Disco Elysium for the Switch is basically unplayable. So what happened was, I would go through this long-ass conversation with the guy with the cigarette, and then he would have this long cutscene where he would walk up his stairs and then disappear into his apartment. Well, disappear into what we later found out was his apartment. So what happened was, I would talk to the guy with the cigarette, and I would go through this long-ass conversation, and then I would go through everything in the conversation that I needed to get through, and then he would start his long-ass cutscene where he would walk up the stairs and disappear into the little hallway where he lives, and I wouldn't be able to move. But then somewhere in there, the game would glitch out, and I would get frozen. One time I waited for an hour. It didn't come unfrozen. The only thing I could do is scroll up and down in the conversation. I couldn't access the save menu or anything like that. So I reloaded it over and over and over again until it finally worked. At one point I played this Pokemon ROM hack called Pokemon Dark Crystal, which was incredibly fun, but eventually the glitches became so bad that I was unable to finish the game. I started to be really, really concerned that that was what was going to happen with Disco Elysium, but at this point I had been playing the game for about 20 hours and I wasn't willing to start over. I actually started to consider maybe jailbreaking my Switch so that I could move the file from my Switch to my computer. I did not end up doing this. I decided what I would do is play the game as far as I could and then see if I could finish it anyway. And I was able to finish it, although the logic issues did get worse and worse. However, because of this, I had to watch the cutscenes and read the conversations with this guy with the cigarette over and over and over and over and over and over, which made him a much more important character in my mind than he was probably supposed to be. And the funny thing about the guy with the cigarette is that Harry desires him carnally. Harry wants to fuck this man. Harry wants to... I mean, Harry doesn't even know what he wants. But I started to wonder if maybe this was actually a love story. I don't mean about Harry and the guy with the cigarette, whose name I'm not even sure we find out. But I had seen around the internet through, pop cultural osmosis, quite a bit of shippy fan art of Harry and Kim, and I was like, is Harry gay? Is Harry supposed to end up with Kim? Does everybody like Kim because Harry and Kim get together? And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I was like, this doesn't sit right with me. Harry is a burden to Kim. They are unequally yoked. If Harry and Kim were in a relationship, it wouldn't be fair because Kim had to take care of Harry basically all of the time. He had to watch out for him and make sure he didn't do anything stupid. Harry was whiny and apologetic all of the time, and it wouldn't be healthy. It wouldn't be balanced. I figured in a relationship like that, I would pity Kim. Day 4. So on day 4, I was finally able to quit alcohol. I recognize that I have no idea how hard it is to quit alcohol. In real life, I don't drink. And the reason I don't drink or do any drugs or smoke anything at all or do anything risky really is, okay, I do a few risky things, but I have an addictive personality and I know this about myself. A few months ago, I was on a work trip with some other people that I work with, and they convinced me to go to a casino. And I have programmed a blackjack AI before, so I know a bit about the math behind blackjack and how to make the right decisions. So I played blackjack. I spent $20 and made $90. It made me feel like a genius. It made me feel like the most special, wonderful person who ever lived. I made myself walk away, and the next morning I woke up wondering if I had enough time to go to the casino before I had to go to the airport. I thought about how wonderful the casino was for a very long time. And that's why I don't do drugs. Every year I try to quit eating meat, and it doesn't work. even this year, it's January 11th, and I've been trying to go every other day without eating meat. And on January 6th, I hit a wall where I started crying uncontrollably, and I had, frankly, a bit of diarrhea. And I broke down and bought a hamburger. I was able to go yesterday without eating meat, so I'm kind of getting back on the wagon. But it's very difficult. I've never been able to quit anything, I think, ever. And I'm not here to say that it's as easy as it was in Disco Elysium to quit anything. But the way to quit in Disco Elysium is to never get started. I've seen what drugs and alcohol do mechanically through other people's runs, and it looks like it gives a serious stat boost. I had no idea you could get those stat boosts until I was finished with the game. I mean, I knew you could drink for a stat boost, but I didn't know how powerful it was, and I never allowed myself to consider using it. So to me, the game felt perfectly balanced. I never felt like I needed to use speed or whatever to increase my score, because if I failed a check, I just went and did something else and came back later. I do believe that I ended up with less thoughts than the average player, because I had to spend the vast majority of my level up points on actual skill increases rather than thoughts. So I didn't end up thinking as many things as other players might. But I could be wrong about that, actually. One plot line that I was not actually going to do, but I ended up getting kind of locked into doing because I needed more XP, was the Kuno's dad plot. So Kuno is this really, 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 really annoying kid who stands outside the hanged man and throws rocks at him. And at one point, it's revealed that Kuno's dad is the most violent man in all of Revachol, and Kuno says that he has a kilo of speed in his apartment. Harry says that he can go check this out, maybe take out this most violent man in all of Revachol. Kuno asks if he can split the speed with Harry when he gets it back. I didn't hit the right option to tell Kuno no, although I never did intend to give Kuno the speed. I went, checked out the situation, got the speed, came back, spoke to Kuno, and told him I was not going to give him the speed. Kuno is 12 years old, and he's addicted to speed. And the game asked me if I was really, really, really sure that I wasn't going to give Kuno the speed, because he would never trust me again. But I couldn't. I mean, I'm a very straight-laced person. You just heard the part where I said I've never smoked or done drugs in my entire life, and I don't intend to. And I couldn't give Kuno the speed. He's 12. So I didn't, and Kuno shut down. He basically stopped being an interactable character. He never said anything to me again. Until after I got shot, but he just had the one line and that was it. I felt really, really bad about this. I used to work with teenagers, not troubled teenagers, but I did used to work with teenagers, and I definitely felt like I failed here. Like I felt like I messed up. I didn't know what I should have done, but I ended up Googling whether there was anything I could do to, whether I was actually locked out of interacting with Kuno. And that's when I saw a spoiler that I should not have Googled this in the first place. Basically, I saw something that said that if Kim dies during the tribunal, you can take Kuno as a partner. And so at that point, I realized that the stakes of what was going on right now is that Kim might die. So I started thinking about the game, and I started to think about how, you know, almost everyone in the game really sucks, or sucks in some significant way. The good people are really beaten down. The bad people are very powerful. The nice people aren't necessarily good, and the best person, you know, basically inarguably is Kim. You are supposed to believe that Kim is the best person in the game. And I started to think about it, and I came to the conclusion that at some point the game was going to make me choose between Kim and all of Martinez. So I had put off the task of getting my gun back or getting the armor or anything like that because I didn't think it was important. I didn't want to corrupt myself in the name of getting that gun or whatever. I figured it was more important that I didn't help somebody who was as powerful as Everart than get back my gun, especially because I didn't realize that guns were completely illegal citizens. Because I wanted to be prepared for whatever I could do to save Kim. If it was an option to save Kim, I was going to take it. I thought about all those awful people, and I was like, am I willing to let Everart Claire get hurt because of Kim? No, you know. At this point, I didn't really like Titus, so I was like, yeah, no, not Titus either. I had figured out at this point that, or I had been told that Everart Claire was trying to start a war that would cause Wild Pines to allow him to maintain control of the island. Sorry, the harbor. So I came to a decision. I thought to myself, fuck Revachol, fuck Martinez and everyone in it. Kim Kitsuragi comes first. So I seriously started trying to get my gun back. I got the signatures. I went and bought Suzerainty, a game that you can use to... It's a game you can play with Kim. It's kind of like a fun little, not even a side quest, but I figured if I needed to level up my friendship with Kim or whatever, it would be useful. Then at one point I went and talked to Annette, little Annette, and one of the logical problems in the game came up again. She gave me my hat. I had given my hat to a seal, and because it wasn't in my inventory, Annette gave me my hat for the very first time again. So at least I got my hat back, which is cool because I didn't have my pen. Later on I lost my hat again, and Annette gave me the hat again. So it happens every time you don't have the hat. And I thought about Annette, and there's a lot of people who really, really suck, but there's a lot of teenagers. There's a lot of preteens in this game. And Harry cares about them, or at least, you know, if you play a good Harry, he cares about them. And I realized that if it was truly the case that I was going to have to choose between Martinez and Kim, I had to protect the children. I had to protect, you know, the adults really sucked, but Harry had kind of organically started to care about the teenagers, and I had to take care of them. I had to make sure that the war didn't occur. Obviously, if you've played the game, you know that this is not a real choice that occurs. But in real life, I spent a couple of days, like I was walking around Home Depot, and I was like, damn, is it worth it to kill a bunch of bad people to save a good person? I guess that's a topic for a different game, though, because that didn't come up. Also, on day 4, I sang karaoke, and it was awesome. I had a fantastic drama score, so I passed the check like flawlessly. That being said, I was encouraged by some friends to go back and try doing it wrong, well, failing, and oh my gosh, it's so funny. If you have the opportunity, if you've passed the drama check to sing karaoke well, please go watch the video or clip online, whatever, of what happens if you fail the drama check and sing karaoke poorly. I laughed so hard, I'm pretty sure my neighbors thought something terrible was happening to me. It was amazing. I would have actually kept it, especially given the ending where Kim tries to defend your terrible singing. But unfortunately, in order to try it for a second time, to get the failure, I had to roll back like 3 hours of game. So, yeah, I didn't want to do that. But I forgot about the requirement to to go like at night when there would be a lot of people, so it was a little bit underwhelming in that regard. So on day 5, I was finally able to finish up the disco task. I was held up for a really, really long time because I couldn't open the fucking ice cream maker. I failed that check like 9 times. That was the only check in the game that a couple of times I save scummed. And I failed it over and over and over and over and over. Like I failed it on 90+%. It was so bad. It took days. But I finally got the dance club up and running. I told them to name it Disco Elysium. And even though I never figured out that, or Harry never figured out that they were using it for something related to drugs, I was eventually able to get Harry to dance. I reveled in the happiness of this. This was the first like actually good thing that had occurred in Harry's life. He had kicked his alcohol problem, but he was still really struggling. Like, just because he wasn't drinking anymore didn't mean that he wasn't having nightmares or whatever. At one point, he did die from reading the letter from his ex-wife. So that sucked. Actually, I don't know if he died. No, I think he just blacked out. Yeah, he blacked out. I thought he died. So here he was dancing. I got everybody to dance along. I passed the check to get Kim to dance with me. Apparently, if you fail the check to get Kim to dance with you, you call him a slur and then he leave you the party for the rest of the day. So I'm glad I didn't know that, because I might have not even tried to dance at all. But yeah, I really felt like Harry was actually making progress. He was helping people. He'd talked to some suspects and stuff, but as far as Harry himself, he was actually doing better. At one point, I stumbled across a comment on Reddit where somebody was like, yeah, I realized I apologized way too much, and I realized that I had to stop apologizing, because at this point I was 3 days past being diagnosed as a sorry cop, and I had only started apologizing more. And of course, like I said, I felt like Harry was a burden to Kim and all that stuff. But around this time, I decided to try stopping apologizing, especially because I got the thought superstar cop, and I was like, okay, I need to get Harry thinking that he is a positive force for himself again. And I realized around this time that Kim needs Harry as much as Harry needs Kim, just for different reasons. We find out once you pass the Feld mural and learn about the Wumpty Dumpty Dom Center, or maybe this is just where I found it out, that Kim's last partner died. In fact, died in the light of duty protecting Kim. And it's been a couple of years and he hasn't gotten a new partner. We know that Kim can't see. We know that Kim at least appears to be a physically less imposing person than Harry. So long as you remain non-toxic and remain kind and not emotionally, not requiring Kim to do emotional labor for you, minding Harry does actually bring Kim some amount of satisfaction. It's good for him to know that someone needs him. But he's one of the only Seolis, or I don't remember the actual word they made up for that, people that we see in the game, and many racists comment on it. So he feels like he's not part of society the same way that everybody else is. He definitely gives an air of not giving a fuck because he kind of sees himself as distant from everyone else. He's been treated poorly for so long that he's virtually given up on being part of society, and he needs somebody to stand up for him. Not because he can't stand up for himself, but so that he has the knowledge that someone would. And once I started playing Harry this way, with this knowledge in mind, that he wasn't a burden, that he wasn't, that he needed to be positive towards himself and he needed to be positive for Kim, I stopped seeing him as Kim's burden. I stopped seeing them as being so unequal. About Joyce, I was really pissed at her for not telling me about the tribunal. I was like really angry. But I was able to get her to stop the war by going off to tell Wild Pines that they shouldn't fight. She couldn't stop the tribunal, but she could stop the war. And I figured that was about as much as I could ask of her. Other than, you know, if she had told me about the tribunal in the first place, that would have been cool. But she did stop the war, and I've seen some people say that they wish she had done more, but I mean, she's one lady with no combat skill. I didn't blame her for sailing off. I did blame her for not telling me about the tribunal, though. But she also gave me $130. So then I reached day 6. Day 6 was when the logic breakdowns really started to get kind of bad. I had conversations with people where they referenced things I didn't know anything about. It was becoming a little bit of a problem, but I at least knew the cause, and I knew that I was approaching the end of the game. I found Ruby. I unfortunately did get spoiled on the fact that if I didn't let her go, she would kill herself, so I did let her go. I also let Clausier go. Clausier? Shit. I saw the pronunciation guide on screen a bunch of times, but I never tried to say it out loud before. I did let Clausier go, but that was my own judgment, and I'm glad that I did, because she left the clue that, you know, allowed me to figure out the murder. I am pretty proud of the letting Clausier go thing, because several times the game did try to get me to arrest her. I walked away from the building and Volition was like, hang on, why are we not arresting this woman? But I made the judgment that it was not a good idea, and that was one of the only judgments that I made myself, despite what the game told me, because when you're playing at a really high level of intelligence and psyche, the game is pretty much telling you most of the answers, which could be seen as a good thing or a bad thing. When Ruby said that I was a dirty cop, she'd heard on the radio that I was a dirty cop, I did actually die of shock. Jade was very shocked. And then I went to the tribunal. So the tribunal is basically the combat climax of the game. The bad guys come out and defend their fallen friend. They go up against the Union enforcer cop guys, and you try to get in the middle. I made sure that I had my necktie and I had my armor. The armor that I had, I made sure I equipped my gun. I had my necktie, but the game actually didn't make the spirit bomb for me until after the tribunal was over, because the game was very, very confused. Just one more logical breakdown. And I went through the tribunal. I fortunately had a lot of skills that were used in the tribunal that I had built up throughout the course of the game. My hand-eye coordination was decent, but my conceptualization was very good. My rhetoric was obviously my signature skill, so it was my highest skill. So I was able to pass all of the checks. And then I got shot, and things start to fade out. Kim starts to freak out that you got shot, tries to save you, and then the game froze. And the same thing that had happened with the man with the cigarette happened, and the game stopped for a second. And most of the time when it stopped, it was because there was going to be a continue. So I hit A, and what it was it said that Kim is standing over you, trying to prevent you from bleeding out, and a shadow comes behind Kim, and I was like, okay, now what? And 20 plus years of video games experience played against me, and I hit A without thinking, and the game froze after that. Well, it froze and long enough for me to hit A, and then the game froze for a moment after that, long enough for me to see what I had just hit A on. So there were two options. Lay down and die, or try to save Kim. And I had hit lay down and die. And then Kim got shot. So I realized that I had fucked up. I knew that the rest of the game, if I knew that if Kim dies, you play the rest of the game with Kuno as your partner. It replaces Kim. I also knew that there is some implication that lets you know that Kim is alive. You just kind of don't really know that for sure, or something like that. I didn't really know. So I figured that I was going to have to play the rest of the game by myself, and because I had already alienated Kuno by not giving him the speed. Psych! I did not do that shit. I reset from the last save, went back. I failed every single check. I failed the rhetoric check. I failed the hand-eye coordination check. Everything went as poorly as it could possibly go, but I still ended up at the same spot with the two options: lay down and die, or try to use the last remaining vestiges of my strength to save Kim. I scrolled down, I looked at the check, it said I had a 97% of success because Kim truly trusted me. I hit success, woke up 2 days later, Kim and I are both alive. And I do not feel bad about it. I felt pretty bad about save scumming to try to open the fucking ice cream maker, but I did not feel bad at all about save scumming to try to save Kim, because I felt like the game had crashed enough on me. The game had crashed on me like 8+ times. Probably more than 8 or 10 times. I was gonna use some counter crashing. Now, if I had failed the 97% chance to save Kim, I might have actually kept it, but no, I probably wouldn't have. I don't know what I would have done. But fortunately, I passed it. I proceeded into the final part of the game with Kim as my partner. I went ahead and made sure that I approached all of the white checks that I had. The last one that I had was conceptualization on the wall. I had failed the conceptualization check on that wall like 6 times. It had gotten to the point where Kim was getting very frustrated with me. Every time we passed the wall, he's like, "Do we have to stop and look at this wall?" Every time. And I finally passed the conceptualization check, and I used the paint can, which I had previously used in a previous save that had crashed, to make 10 real, but instead I used it to paint the words "something beautiful is going to happen" on the wall, which felt very out of place at this point in the game, but I didn't care. Then we proceeded to the island. I did a couple of times try to go on a date with Lillian the net picker. I failed every single check. I wasn't going to try to date anyone, but I hadn't figured out that you needed to look at the Feld mural twice. So I was trying to exhaust every single possibility before I just ended up looking at the Feld mural again and realizing, you know, what I should have been doing the whole time. So I tried to go on a date with Lillian the net picker, but it didn't. I never passed the check, and I didn't push it. I got the boat. We went across the water. We did not have the element of surprise because I did blast my radio the whole time. And then we went into the dream sequence. So in the final dream sequence, Harry dreams of the last time he spoke to his now ex-wife or ex-fiancée, Dora. He doesn't remember her face, so he sees her as the Jesus of this world, Dolores Day. And this is the part, like I said, I knew there were things I wasn't supposed to do here because not only am I a woman, but also I have a level of emotional intelligence that prevents me from doing many of the things that Harry wanted to do. One such thing being try to show her how much you love her by forcing a kiss on her. I did not do that. I have no idea what happens if you try to do that. But at this point in the game, I was like, man, I almost forgot about Dora. I didn't really care about Harry's whole thing with his ex-wife. But I finally truly connected with Harry's predicament at this moment. because it's revealed in this dream that Harry has tried to make himself lose his memory over and over again so that he will not have this dream. He's trying to escape this dream. And this is when I got it, and this is when I became convinced that Harry could not be saved. Because the thing is, when I was 11 years old, I started having night terrors. They run in my family, or at least I think they run in my family. I would dream, it started mostly when I got my cat. I would dream about her dying, and then I would dream about myself killing her. And then it moved on to other things. I dreamt that I was responsible for the death of people in my life. I started dreaming that people in my life were trying to kill me, or that I was killing them. By the time I got into college, it got to the point where it was affecting my interactions with people. I would see someone and remember the dream that I had had about them. And the only thing that I could find that would mitigate this was I would start telling people about it. I would say, "Hi, my name is Jade and I have night terrors." I would tell them all about it, even if they didn't want to hear. And that seemed to make them go away a little bit. I also tried all kinds of other things to try to get them under control. I slept less. I worked myself to exhaustion up until time to go to sleep, and then I woke up at the exact same time every morning so that I wouldn't remember my dreams. At its peak, I had 7 memorable dreams every single night, and they were all terrible. Eventually, a member of my family recommended galantamine, a very diluted form of an Alzheimer's medication that supposedly makes you lucid dream. I thought it was bunk. I took it, and I had the first pleasant dream that I could remember having for about 10 years. I dreamt that I was Dragon from Worm, who was a character that I really, really liked, that I wanted to be like. And I just dreamt that I had had a day in the life of her. And I felt very happy in the dream. I felt content. And at that point, because I had had so many nightmares for so long, I no longer felt anything when I had nightmares. So I've never taken galantamine again, because despite the fact that dream was so positive, I am afraid that it also has the power to make me emotionally involved in my negative dreams. That being said, I have mostly gotten these under control. I have a very strict nightly routine. I go to sleep at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every morning. And last year, I mostly had good dreams. Well, I mostly had no dreams, but I did have 2 good dreams, which is a very good year for me. In college, the dreams started to slow down because I was grinding my teeth instead. These are obviously less disturbing, but I felt like I wasn't getting sleep every time I ground my teeth. After lots of experimentation and note-taking, I feel like I've come to a rhythm that sort of minimizes my sleep problems. But it still feels like a part of my mind that exists purely to torment me. I mostly dream about being responsible for something bad happening, but I've never been responsible for the death of someone close to me. When I saw this dream about Dolores Day, I instantly pattern matched it to myself. I thought, if something were to happen where I was responsible for the death of someone close to me, I would be in the same predicament. I would have that dream over and over again, and I wouldn't be able to stop it. And I can see myself doing all kinds of things to attempt to escape that situation, things that may not be good for me. So at this point in the game, you know, right up towards the end, all of a sudden I started to believe, or I actually did believe, that Harry's problems were unsolvable. I went all the things that I had Harry doing, all the progress that I tried to guide him through. This is just going to happen again. There's no escape. I went through the final encounter with the murderer and the phasmid, which I cried and cried and cried quite a bit, actually. Harry speaks to this cryptid who tells him that she's proud of him for all of his efforts. And it sounds very cheesy, but it's very emotional. But I still didn't believe that that this signaled any kind of change until later when I thought back on it. And the thing is that whenever Harry is talking to the Insulindian Phasmid, the voice that she uses, it says in the text, is Inland Empire, which is the name for Harry's imagination. And so what that tells me is that the voice coming from the Phasmid is Harry's imagination. But the thing is, in the context of the game, that is a good thing. I didn't put this together until after the game was over, and this is just my interpretation. But the Insulindian Phasmid tells Harry that he has to let go of that woman. He has to let go of his ex-wife and the life that they could have had. And a million people have told Harry that he needs to do this, and he never listened. But if the voice truly was Inland Empire, if it was Harry's imagination, then he told that to himself. That tells me that there is hope for him. Although I did come to this conclusion after the game was over. So in the actual climax, I guess, of the game, you are confronted by your old squad. They ask you questions to see whether you are sane, because they want to... your old partner, Jean, really wants you actually kicked off the force. Well, he feels more complicated about it than that, but they want to know whether you're fit for duty. And I was so angry at this guy. I hated Jean. Hated is a strong word, but he abandoned me. Like, I told him, I said, you abandoned me when I needed backup. There was a shootout and you were not there. You know, you were in the cafeteria before the shootout, and after the shootout you were gone. You didn't come to visit me after I got shot. Piece of shit. I called him every name under the sun, but really I was just trying to get Harry out of the Precinct 41. I knew, based on what I had learned from Dolores Day, or the dream about Dolores Day, and then something that Jean says later, Harry has been doing this over and over again. He tries to wipe his memory. He tries to... He tries to delete Dora from his mind, and I knew that if he went back to Precinct 41, it would happen again. Everybody can quit doing something for 4 days. Okay, maybe not everybody can quit doing something for 4 days, but, you know, just the fact that he had not drank for a few days didn't mean anything if he was going back to the exact same life that he had before. I wanted him to quit. I wanted him to go back to being a gym teacher, which is apparently the job that he had before he was a cop. I wanted him to, he could go with Kim to Precinct 57. I didn't care. He needed to not go back to Precinct 41 with Jean. I said every horrible thing I could find. I mean, within reason, because I didn't want them to commit me to an asylum or whatever. I didn't know if that was on, if that was on the line. But I said as cogently as possible, dude, you abandoned me. You go shove it up your ass. But ultimately, what decides whether you get back on the force is not your behavior. Because what happens at the very end of the game is Jean turns to Kim and says, you have spent the last week with Harry. What do you think? And based on everything that you did while Kim was around during the game, Kim gives his assessment of you. And so even though the game cleverly hides it, the game really does come down to, at least at this point, to Kim's opinion of you. And I think it's really genius how the developers got you to care first and foremost about Kim's opinion when that ended up being what decides your fate. And in my case, of course, because I had been a very good cop and had always been nice to Kim and had, you know, yelled at people who were mean to him and played board games with him and all that stuff. He said that he didn't like my politics and that I apologized way more than was professional. But that my singing voice actually was pretty good and I was the best detective he had ever worked with. Which made me very happy. Because as you can tell from my face and from everything that I've said, I did end up actually caring what Kim thought about me. But at this point I was starting to freak out because I had done so well that Kim had gotten me back on the police force. And there was no speech option I had chosen had gotten me to be kicked off the police force. I wanted to leave. I needed But really I needed Harry to change, or I needed something about Harry's life to change, because I felt very strongly that if things went the way they were going, Harry would just go back to the way he was before the end of the game, before the beginning of the game. And so I came to the very last prompt in the entirety of Disco Elysium. Thousands upon thousands of questions and answers. And the question is just, Kim, what are you doing after this? And I had no idea what was under that, but it gives you the option to ask Kim to come with you. And of course I picked that option, because this, in my mind, is what can make the difference. The elements of Harry's life that actually can change, or the one element of Harry's life that actually can change, is that he can choose to take Kim with him when he goes home. And for that reason, I feel that there is hope for him after the end of the game. Couple notes about the ending. I love the fact that Harry used to be a gym teacher. It's just very charming. I loved it. And but I really loved the idea that Jean calls Dora an exceptionally fuckable woman. The idea of Dora's rejection being this important to Harry, it exists in Harry's mind. And there are all kinds of surface level and deep reasons that Harry has latched so hard onto the abandonment he feels from his ex-wife. But ultimately, he needs somebody in his life saying, this woman was just an exceptionally fuckable woman. Because he needs to understand that this exists in his mind and he can think his way out of it. He thought his way out of many, many things in this game, and he needs to think himself out of this one more. Also, of course, the revelation that that he wanted to be a dad, or he tried to be a dad. These kinds of stories just hit me in the soul. It happens. I forgot to put this somewhere, but if you liked the dynamic between Harry and Kim in this game, but not in the romantic sense, I would highly recommend checking out Space Force. Space Force on Netflix is largely about the relationship between this science professor and, I didn't think too hard about how I was going to phrase this, science professor played by John Malkovich, and Steve Carell's character, a military general, and they start out not getting along, and then, well, you have to watch the show. It, of course, did not receive great reviews, and Netflix canceled it, just like they recently canceled Inside Job this week. But I really enjoy Space Force, and this game reminded me of Space Force a lot. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you enjoyed this. And of course, if you enjoyed this, please check out Disco Elysium. It's a great game. I think you will like it. This has gone on for a really long time. I have been filming this for about 2.5 hours. I have no idea how long this video will end up being, but it's getting to the point where I need to go appease the language owl because I'm running out of time. So something beautiful is going to happen. See you at the next one. And somewhere in there, the game would crash.